Grizzly bear attacks are rare, but when they happen, they're fast, violent, and often unforgiving. Whether triggered by a drone's buzz, a wrong turn into a bear corridor, or a photo taken too close, these encounters prove one truth. In wild country, a single misstep can be fatal. Each story here captures the brutal unpredictability of nature when boundaries are ignored or misunderstood. From 5 hunters killed by a mother grizzly in Ussuri Krai to a sleepy student stumbling into a bear-occupied outhouse, these are tales of survival, tragedy, and chilling near misses. The remote wilderness of Ussuri Krai in Russia's Far East had always been unforgiving territory, but on May 10, 2025, it would claim 5 lives in minutes. This rugged region, stretching along the border with China and North Korea, represented some of Earth's last truly wild country. Dense taiga forests carpeted rolling hills, while shallow ridges and hidden valleys created a maze of terrain that had challenged hunters and trappers for centuries. The area was home to the Ussuri brown bear, a massive subspecies of the Russian grizzly that could weigh over 1,400 pounds and stood among the largest predators in Asia. Maxim Volkov had been planning this expedition for months. Vladivostok's 34-year-old social media creator specialized in extreme hunting adventures, building a following of nearly 500,000 subscribers who craved authentic wilderness experiences. His channel, Wild Russia Expeditions, had gained popularity by showcasing the raw beauty and danger of Siberian hunting. For this particular trip, Volkov had assembled his dream team. His longtime hunting partner Dmitry Kozlov, drone operator Pavel Simonov, cameraman Alexei Petrov, and survival expert Yuri Nikitin. The group had spent 2 days tracking elk through the fog-shrouded valleys, documenting their every move with multiple cameras and cutting-edge drone equipment. They carried professional-grade rifles, thermal imaging devices, and enough recording gear to produce a documentary-quality series. Despite warnings from local guides, they did not carry bear spray. Volkov had dismissed such precautions as unnecessary, claiming that proper awareness and firearms provided adequate protection. On their final morning, the hunters had located a promising elk trail winding through a series of low ridges covered in dense brush. The fog hung thick in the hollows, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that Volkov knew would translate beautifully on camera. Semenov deployed his drone to capture overhead footage of their stalking formation, while Petrov positioned himself with a telephoto lens to document the hunt from ground level. The drone's mechanical whirring was heard in the still morning air as it climbed above the ridgeline. Semenov guided the drone in smooth, cinematic arcs, capturing the 5 hunters moving in practiced formation through the undergrowth. The footage would later show their focus on their screens and equipment, their attention divided between the hunt ahead and the content they created. None of them realized that barely 50 meters away, hidden in a shallow depression beneath the ridge, a massive female grizzly was nursing 2 young cubs. The sow, estimated later to weigh over 900 pounds, had chosen this sheltered spot specifically for its protection and isolation. She rested peacefully until the drone's persistent buzzing began to circle overhead. Bears possess remarkably acute hearing, and the mechanical noise immediately triggered the mother's protective instincts. She rose to her feet, testing the air with her sensitive nose while her cubs scrambled behind her. The drone continued its choreographed flight pattern, the sound growing louder and more agitating with each pass. The grizzly's patience snapped when the aircraft dipped low over her hiding spot. Kozlov was the first to see her emerge from the brush, a blur of brown fur and raw power charging up the slope toward their position. He warned the others, but the bear's speed was breathtaking. Adult grizzlies can reach 35 miles per hour in short bursts, and the sow covered the distance between her cubs and the perceived threat in seconds. Volkov managed to swing his rifle toward the charging bear, but never had the chance to fire. The grizzly's first swipe caught him across the chest with enough force to lift him off his feet and send him crashing into a cluster of birch trees. Still focused on his drone controls, Semenov looked up as the bear reached him. She knocked him down with a backhand blow that investigators would later determine broke his neck instantly. Petrov dropped his camera and tried to run, but the uneven terrain worked against him. He stumbled over a fallen log and fell hard, giving the grizzly time to reach him. Nikitin, the survival expert who should have known better, attempted to climb a nearby tree, but the bear pulled him down before he reached safety. His extensive wilderness knowledge proved useless against 900 pounds of maternal fury. Kozlov, the only one still standing, managed to fire a single shot that went wide before the bear turned on him. She knocked him backward over the ridgeline, where he landed badly on the rocks below. The entire attack lasted less than 3 minutes, but when it was over, 4 men lay dead, and Kozlov was bleeding internally from multiple injuries. With tremendous effort, Kozlov began crawling toward a rock outcropping, where he hoped to find safety and perhaps signal for help. He managed to climb partway up the ledge before his strength failed. Rangers would find his body the next day, his phone still clutched in his hand with an unsent emergency message. The drone, still hovering overhead on automatic pilot, continued recording throughout the incident. When search teams recovered the equipment 2 days later, the footage provided a chillingly clear account of how quickly the situation had deteriorated. The final frames showed the grizzly mother returning to her cubs before disappearing into the dense taiga, having successfully defended her young from what she perceived as a deadly threat. The incident sparked widespread debate about the risks of using drones in bear country and the importance of carrying proper deterrence when filming in remote wilderness areas. In 2019, the wilderness of northwestern Montana stretched endlessly across the Continental Divide. In this landscape, ancient glaciers had carved deep valleys and left behind a network of wildlife corridors that remained largely unchanged for millennia. With its towering peaks and pristine forests, the national park region served as critical habitat for one of the largest grizzly bear populations in the lower 48 states. These seasonal migration routes, invisible to most humans but essential to the ecosystem, connected feeding areas across hundreds of square miles of rugged terrain. Marcus Kellerman and his hunting partner, Tobias Hartwell, had been friends since childhood, growing up together in the small logging town of Whitefish. Both men, now in their early 40s, were experienced outdoors people who had hunted these mountains for over 2 decades. Kellerman worked as a heavy equipment operator for a local logging company, while Hartwell managed a sporting goods store that catered to the region's hunting and fishing enthusiasts. Their annual elk hunting trip had become a sacred tradition, a week-long escape from work and family life pressures. On September 15, 2019, the 2 men had successfully harvested a large bull elk in a remote valley nearly 8 miles from their base camp. The magnificent 6-point bull, weighing over 700 pounds, represented the culmination of 3 days of careful tracking through challenging terrain. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, they faced a critical decision about their route back to camp. The established trail would take them along a well-marked path that wound through several switchbacks, adding approximately an hour to their journey. With daylight fading and storm clouds gathering on the western horizon, Kellerman suggested they take a more direct route he had noticed on their topographical map. The shortcut would save them valuable time and get them back to camp before dark, avoiding the need to field dress their elk in the darkness. Hartwell disagreed about leaving the marked trail system, but the logic seemed sound. They were experienced navigators with GPS units and compass bearings, and the terrain looked manageable on their maps. Neither man realized their chosen route would take them directly through what wildlife biologists classified as a high-traffic bear corridor. Grizzlies moved between late-season berry patches and salmon spawning streams in this natural funnel. The logging activity in the adjacent valley had been particularly intensive that summer, with heavy machinery operating 6 days a week since June. The constant noise and human presence had pushed several bear families to alter their traditional movement patterns, creating increased pressure on alternative routes through the wilderness. Stress levels among the local grizzly population were already elevated when Kellerman and Hartwell began their trek through the corridor. They made good time initially, following game trails and natural clearings that confirmed the wisdom of their route choice. The men took turns hauling sections of the elk meat in heavy backpacks, making multiple trips to transport the entire animal. By late afternoon, they had established a temporary processing site in a small clearing to break down the carcass and prepare it for transport efficiently. The work was messy and time-consuming, requiring them to gut and quarter the elk, while the rich scent of fresh blood and exposed meat permeated the surrounding forest. Both men were focused on their task, knives working methodically to separate meat from bone, when the first signs of danger appeared. Fresh grizzly tracks in the soft earth near their worksite suggested recent activity, but neither hunter noticed the massive paw prints pressed into the mud just yards from where they worked. The male grizzly approaching their location was already agitated from weeks of disrupted routine caused by the logging operations. Estimated to weigh over 800 pounds, the bear had been searching for alternative food sources when the overwhelming scent of fresh elk meat reached him. Unlike a defensive sow protecting cubs, this bear approached with predatory intent, viewing the hunters as competitors for a valuable resource. Kellerman was the first to see the massive shape emerging from the tree line, a wall of brown fur and muscle moving with surprising stealth for such a large animal. He reached for his rifle immediately, but the bear closed the distance faster than either man could react. The grizzly's charge covered 30 yards in less than 3 seconds, a blur of focused aggression that left no time for defensive measures. The first impact sent Kellerman sprawling backward over their pile of equipment, his rifle flying from his hands to land several feet away. The bear immediately focused on him as the perceived primary threat, massive jaws clamping down on his torso with crushing force. Hartwell managed to grab his weapon and fire a single shot, but his aim was hurried, and the bullet only grazed the bear's shoulder, serving to enrage the already aggressive animal further. Blood from the elk carcass had saturated the ground around their work site, creating a chaotic mix of scents that seemed to drive the grizzly into a frenzy. The wounded bear released Kellerman and turned toward Hartwell, who realized his only chance for survival was immediate escape. He dropped his rifle and sprinted toward a nearby creek, crashing through dense underbrush as the bear pursued. The icy water of the mountain stream provided his salvation. Hartwell threw himself into the current, allowing the fast-moving water to carry him downstream while the bear stopped at the water's edge, apparently unwilling to follow. His left shoulder had been dislocated during his desperate flight, and the shock of the cold water combined with his injuries left him barely conscious as he floated nearly a mile downstream. Park rangers found Hartwell the following morning, suffering from severe hypothermia and barely coherent from shock. His account of the attack led search teams to discover Kellerman's body at the processing site, confirming the sequence of events that had turned a routine hunting trip into a deadly encounter with one of nature's most formidable predators. Afognak Island, located just north of Kodiak Island in the Gulf of Alaska, represented one of North America's last pristine wilderness areas during the summer of 2018. This remote landmass, spanning over 700 square miles of untouched forest and salmon-rich streams, was home to some of the largest brown bears on Earth. The Kodiak subspecies, isolated on these islands for thousands of years, had evolved into magnificent giants that could reach weights exceeding 1,500 pounds. The island's dense population of these massive predators and its challenging terrain and unpredictable weather made it a destination reserved only for the most experienced wildlife professionals. Lena Hartley arrived on Afognak Island in early July 2018, carrying credentials that had taken her 15 years to establish. The 42-year-old wildlife photographer from Anchorage had built an international reputation capturing intimate portraits of Alaska's most dangerous predators. Her work had appeared in popular magazines and numerous conservation publications, always emphasizing the delicate balance between human observers and wild animals. Hartley's approach combined technical expertise with an almost supernatural ability to predict animal behavior, skills that had kept her safe during countless encounters with wolves, mountain lions, and bears throughout Alaska and western Canada. Her assignment on Afognak focused on documenting the summer salmon runs and their impact on the island's bear population. The project, commissioned by the Fish and Game authorities, required detailed photographic evidence of feeding behaviors, territorial interactions, and cub development patterns. Hartley had spent 2 weeks establishing observation posts along 3 different salmon streams, carefully noting travel patterns and individual bear characteristics to help her predict safe photography opportunities. The island's terrain presented unique challenges for wildlife photography, with dense stands of Sitka spruce and devil's club creating natural barriers that limited visibility and escape routes. Hartley had identified several prime locations where the forest opened onto gravel bars along salmon streams, providing clear sight lines while maintaining reasonable distances from feeding bears. Her standard protocol involved arriving at these positions before dawn, when bear activity was minimal, and remaining motionless for hours while the animals grew accustomed to her presence. On her final morning, July 23rd, Hartley had positioned herself at her most productive location, an elevated bank overlooking a deep pool where salmon congregated before making their final spawning run. The morning had been exceptionally fruitful, with a large male bear arriving just after sunrise to begin his daily fishing routine. The animal, which she had been observing for several days, demonstrated a remarkable fishing technique, standing motionless in the current before exploding into action when salmon ventured within striking distance. The bear maintained his position approximately 200 yards downstream from her observation post, a distance Hartley considered ideal for her telephoto equipment while respecting the animal's space. Her 600mm lens allowed her to capture frame-filling portraits without approaching closer than wildlife safety protocols recommended. The morning light filtering through the forest canopy created perfect conditions for the dramatic images she needed to complete her assignment. Around mid-morning, the fishing bear moved further downstream, apparently following a concentration of salmon into deeper water. Hartley realized this presented an opportunity for a different angle to show the bear's massive size about the surrounding landscape. She carefully packed her tripod and began moving through the forest to a position that would provide the perspective she envisioned. The route to her new vantage point required navigating through dense alder thickets and devil's club patches that limited visibility to just a few yards in any direction. Hartley moved slowly and deliberately, pausing frequently to listen for sounds that might indicate bear activity. The forest seemed quiet except for the distant sound of splashing water and the occasional call of ravens feeding on salmon scraps along the stream bank. She reached her intended position and began setting up her tripod when a subtle shift in the wind direction brought with it a realization that froze her blood. The musky, wild scent of bear was overwhelming and immediate, indicating the presence of an animal much closer than she had anticipated. Before she could turn around, a massive shadow emerged from the alders directly behind her. A male brown bear of extraordinary size, moving with the silent efficiency that made these predators so formidable. The bear, later estimated to weigh over 1,200 pounds, had been bedded down in the thick vegetation, apparently resting between feeding sessions. Hartley's approach had brought her within 30 feet of the sleeping giant, close enough that her human scent finally registered despite the wind direction that had initially worked in her favor. The bear's reaction was immediate but not necessarily aggressive. He rose to his full height, easily 9 feet tall when standing upright, and fixed her with an intense stare that seemed to evaluate the level of threat she represented. Hartley's training took over despite the terror coursing through her system. She rose to her full height, raised her arms above her head to appear larger, and began speaking steadily. The bear dropped to all fours but remained motionless, his massive head swaying slightly as he processed her scent and behavior. For what felt like an eternity but probably lasted less than 30 seconds, photographer and predator studied each other across an impossibly small distance. The standoff ended when the bear huffed loudly, a sound Hartley recognized as a sign of stress rather than immediate aggression. The massive animal turned and crashed through the alders, moving away from the confrontation with surprising speed for something so large. Hartley remained frozen for several more minutes, her legs shaking uncontrollably as the adrenaline subsided. Later examination of her remote trail camera, positioned to monitor bear traffic along a nearby game path, revealed the dramatic encounter from a different angle. The footage showed how close she had come to disaster and how proper bear behavior protocols had likely saved her life during those terrifying seconds when human and predator shared the same small patch of wilderness. A national park in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, had become a social media hotspot by 2017, attracting millions of visitors annually who sought the perfect photograph for their online profiles. The park's Cades Cove area, an 11-mile loop road winding through historic settlements and pristine wildlife habitat, offered some of the most accessible bear viewing opportunities in the southeastern United States. Black bears, the park's most charismatic residents, had grown increasingly habituated to human presence as visitor numbers swelled, creating dangerous situations that park officials struggled to manage through education and enforcement. Max Dunfield and Tasha Brennan had built their social media empire around extreme travel content, accumulating over 800,000 combined followers across Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. The 26-year-old couple from Nashville specialized in adventure photography that pushed boundaries and generated engagement through increasingly risky scenarios. Their brand, Wild Hearts Adventures, monetized their willingness to get closer to danger than most people would consider reasonable, turning near-miss encounters into viral content that generated substantial advertising revenue. On October 14, 2017, the couple arrived at Cades Cove during peak fall foliage season, when the combination of brilliant autumn colors and active wildlife created ideal conditions for dramatic photography. They had spent the morning capturing content at various locations throughout the loop. Still, They had yet to encounter the bears that would provide the centerpiece for their planned video series about Smoky Mountain wildlife. Around midday, while driving the one-way loop road, they spotted a large black bear grazing in a distant meadow, approximately 150 yards from the roadway. The sow, estimated to weigh around 300 pounds, appeared calm and focused on foraging for acorns and other fall foods to help her build fat reserves for winter hibernation. Other visitors had stopped their vehicles to observe and photograph the bear from the safety of the road, maintaining the 150-foot distance required by park regulations. Dunfield immediately recognized the opportunity for content that would distinguish their brand from typical tourist photography. While Brennan remained near their rental car with a video camera, he gathered his professional photography equipment and approached the bear for a closer shot. His telephoto lens could capture stunning detail from a safe distance, but Dunfield had built his reputation on dramatic close-up images that created emotional connections with his audience. Park warning signs clearly stated the minimum distance requirements for bear encounters, but Dunfield had developed a pattern of ignoring such restrictions in pursuit of compelling content. His Instagram feed featured dozens of images taken within dangerous proximity to wildlife in various national parks, each post generating thousands of likes and comments from followers who praised his courage and photographic skills. Brennan continued filming from the roadside as Dunfield crept closer to the feeding bear, closing the distance to approximately 50 yards. Her footage would later show how the bear initially appeared unaware of his approach, continuing to forage while positioning himself behind trees and using natural terrain features to mask his movement. The autumn landscape provided excellent camouflage, with fallen leaves muffling his footsteps as he advanced. Neither Dunfield nor Brennan realized that the sow was not alone in the meadow. Hidden in a dense thicket of mountain laurel approximately 20 yards behind the adult bear, a yearling cub waited patiently for its mother to finish feeding. The young bear, nearly full-grown but still dependent on maternal protection, remained concealed as the photographer continued his approach. Black bear mothers with cubs represent one of the most dangerous wildlife encounters possible, as their protective instincts can trigger explosive aggression with little warning. The sow in Cades Cove had successfully raised multiple litters during her estimated 15 years, developing hair-trigger responses to potential threats that had kept her offspring safe in an environment with increasing human pressure. Dunfield had closed to within 30 yards of the adult bear when his movement finally registered as a threat worth addressing. The sow lifted her head from her foraging and fixed him with a direct stare, her body language shifting from relaxed feeding behavior to alert tension. Rather than retreating, Dunfield continued his approach while raising his camera, apparently believing he could capture a few more shots before the bear decided to leave the area. The attack began when Dunfield crossed an invisible threshold that triggered the sow's maternal protection instincts. She charged without warning, behaviors typically displayed by black bears, covering the remaining distance between them in seconds. Her speed, nearly 30 miles per hour in short bursts, left Dunfield no time to retreat or seek shelter. Brennan's video camera captured the entire sequence as her partner dropped his equipment and attempted to backpedal away from the charging bear. The footage showed him stumbling over uneven terrain while the sow swiftly closed the distance. The impact knocked Dunfield to the ground, where the bear's powerful jaws and claws inflicted massive trauma to his chest and abdomen. The attack lasted less than 2 minutes before the sow returned to collect her cub and disappeared into the meadow's dense forest. A park visitor who had witnessed the encounter from the road called emergency services, but by the time paramedics reached Dunfield, he had succumbed to his injuries. Brennan, found in shock beside her camera equipment, provided investigators with the video evidence that documented the sequence of events leading to the fatal encounter. The incident prompted renewed efforts by park officials to educate visitors about wildlife safety and the deadly consequences of ignoring established protocols. Brennan later testified that the couple had deliberately ignored warning signs and distance requirements in pursuit of social media content, a decision that cost her partner his life and left her with permanent psychological trauma from witnessing the attack. The Svalbard archipelago in April 2016 represented the front lines of climate change, where rising Arctic temperatures were transforming ancient ice formations into unstable, ever-shifting platforms of frozen seawater. Located roughly 400 miles north of mainland Norway, these remote islands served as critical habitat for the world's largest population of polar bears. Magnificent predators perfectly adapted to life on sea ice, but increasingly challenged by rapidly changing environmental conditions. The spring season brought particular dangers, as warming temperatures caused ice floes to fracture and drift, creating treacherous conditions for wildlife and the few humans brave enough to venture into this hostile environment. Erik Nielsen had established himself as one of Europe's most experienced Arctic expedition guides during his 20-year career, leading photographers and researchers into some of Earth's most challenging environments. The 48-year-old Norwegian from Tromsø intimately understood polar bear behavior, ice conditions, and survival techniques that had kept dozens of clients safe during expeditions to Greenland, Svalbard, and the Canadian Arctic. His reputation for cautious planning and conservative decision-making made him the preferred guide for high-profile clients seeking authentic Arctic experiences without unnecessary risks. The April 2016 expedition brought together two internationally recognized wildlife photographers, Sebastian Muller from Germany and Catherine Blackwood from Scotland. Both sought to document climate change's impact on polar bear populations. Their assignment, commissioned by a consortium of environmental organizations, required dramatic imagery to illustrate Arctic wildlife's challenges as traditional ice habitat disappeared at unprecedented rates. On April 18, 2016, weather conditions appeared ideal for venturing onto the sea ice north of Longyearbyen, Svalbard's primary settlement. Satellite imagery showed extensive ice coverage extending several miles from shore, with temperatures steady at -10 degrees Celsius. Nielsen's assessment indicated safe conditions for a day-long expedition to position his clients for spectacular sunset photography opportunities. The team departed before dawn, traveling by snowmobile across solid shore-fast ice before transferring to specialized Arctic survival suits for the final approach on foot. Each person carried emergency beacon transmitters, survival gear rated for extreme cold, and sufficient supplies for 48 hours if rescue became necessary. Nielsen's standard protocol emphasized conservative exposure limits and constant monitoring of ice conditions that could change rapidly as tides and currents shifted the frozen landscape. Their intended photography location lay approximately 2 miles from shore, where pressure ridges and wind-carved ice formations created dramatic backdrops for wildlife imagery. The photographers worked efficiently in the harsh conditions, capturing images of ringed seals, Arctic foxes, and the pristine ice environment that represented their primary assignment. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they prepared for the golden hour lighting to provide the expedition's most valuable photographs. The first indication of danger came as a subtle vibration through the ice beneath their feet, barely perceptible but unmistakable to Nielsen's experienced senses. Ocean swells, generated by distant storms and amplified by changing ice conditions, were beginning to fracture the seemingly solid surface that had supported them throughout the day. Within minutes, hairline cracks appeared in the ice around their position, spreading rapidly as tidal forces worked to separate their flow from the main ice sheet. Nielsen immediately ordered an emergency retreat toward shore, but their escape route had already been compromised. Initially just a few feet wide, an open water lead expanded rapidly as its ice flow drifted away from the stationary ice mass. The gap quickly widened beyond jumping distance, leaving the three-person team stranded roughly 50 yards in diameter on an ice platform. Emergency protocols required immediate activation of their satellite beacon transmitters, but the nearest rescue resources were based in Longyearbyen, nearly 2 hours away by helicopter under ideal conditions. Weather reports indicated deteriorating visibility and increasing winds that would complicate any rescue attempt, particularly as daylight faded and Arctic night approached. Their situation became critical when Muller spotted movement on the main ice sheet approximately 300 yards away. A massive male polar bear, estimated to weigh over 1,000 pounds, had detected their scent and was investigating the unusual activity on the drifting flow. Polar bears possess extraordinary swimming abilities and have been documented crossing open water distances exceeding 60 miles, making their ice platform refuge far from secure. The bear entered the water and began swimming toward their position with powerful, methodical strokes that steadily closed the distance between predator and prey. Nielsen positioned himself at the edge of their flow with a flare gun and ice axe, the only defensive weapons available in their survival kit. His experience with polar bear encounters had taught him that these apex predators viewed humans as potential prey, unlike their brown and black bear cousins, which typically avoided human contact. The bear maintained its patient siege of their floating refuge for nearly 6 hours. It circled their ice platform repeatedly, occasionally testing the edges with massive paws while studying the 3 humans representing a mystery and a potential meal. The bear's behavior demonstrated the calculated intelligence that made polar bears such formidable predators, patient and methodical in their assessment of this unusual hunting opportunity. Blackwood documented the encounter with her remaining camera equipment, capturing haunting images of the massive predator against the backdrop of endless Arctic ice. Her photographs would later provide scientists with valuable data about polar bear hunting behavior and adaptation to changing ice conditions caused by climate change. As midnight approached, their satellite beacon finally reached rescue services in Longyearbyen. A helicopter crew with specialized polar bear deterrent equipment located their position using GPS coordinates and thermal imaging technology. The rescue operation required careful coordination to avoid provoking the bear into aggressive action while extracting the stranded team from their precarious situation. The helicopter's approach caused the polar bear to retreat temporarily, providing the narrow window needed for emergency extraction. As the rescue basket lifted Nielsen from the ice floe, he observed the bear still watching from a distance, its pale form nearly invisible against the Arctic landscape. The encounter had lasted almost 6 hours, a testament to the patience and persistence that made polar bears such successful predators in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The Flathead Valley in southeastern British Columbia represented some of Canada's most pristine wilderness during the summer of 2014, encompassing over 2,000 square miles of untouched forest, alpine meadows, and crystal-clear streams that supported one of North America's most diverse ecosystems. This remote region, bordered by a national park in northwestern Montana to the south and surrounded by towering peaks of the Continental Divide, served as critical habitat for grizzly bears, mountain goats, wolverines, and dozens of other species that required vast territories free from human development. The area's isolation and challenging terrain had preserved its ecological integrity, making it an ideal location for conservation research and wildlife monitoring programs. The Flathead Conservation Station, established in 2010 through a partnership between the British Columbia Ministry of Environment and several university research programs, operated as a remote field station during the summer months. The facility consisted of simple wooden structures designed to minimize environmental impact while providing basic shelter for researchers studying wildlife behavior, habitat use patterns, and the effects of climate change on high-altitude ecosystems. The station's location, accessible only by helicopter or a grueling 2-day hike through unmarked wilderness, ensured that research activities would not interfere with natural wildlife patterns. Darren Blackstone arrived at the conservation station in early June 2014 as part of his graduate research program in wildlife biology at a university in British Columbia. The 24-year-old forestry student from Prince George's had volunteered for the summer internship to gain hands-on experience with grizzly bear research, a field of study that combined his passion for wilderness conservation with practical wildlife management skills. His assignment involved monitoring remote camera stations, collecting biological samples, and maintaining detailed records of bear activity throughout the Flathead drainage system. The station's facilities were deliberately primitive, reflecting both budget constraints and environmental philosophy emphasizing minimal impact on the surrounding ecosystem. Solar panels provided limited electrical power for essential equipment, while propane fueled cooking and heating needs during the brief mountain summer. Water came from a nearby creek, and waste management relied on a traditional outhouse approximately 50 yards from the main sleeping quarters. Blackstone had been at the station for 3 weeks when the encounter occurred, long enough to establish daily routines but not yet experienced enough to fully appreciate the constant presence of wildlife that characterized life in true wilderness. His duties required early morning departures to check camera traps and collect data, often leaving camp before sunrise to maximize daylight hours available for fieldwork in the challenging terrain. On June 28, 2014, Blackstone woke before dawn feeling the urgent need to visit the outhouse. The previous evening had been spent celebrating the successful completion of a difficult camera installation project, and he had consumed more beer than usual while sharing stories with the station's other researchers around their evening campfire. His head pounded from mild dehydration, and his stomach churned with the familiar discomfort of too much alcohol and insufficient sleep. The temperature had dropped to near freezing at night, typical for high-altitude locations even during summer. Blackstone hurriedly pulled on boots and a jacket before stumbling through the pre-dawn darkness toward the outhouse. Morning twilight provided just enough visibility to navigate the well-worn path without requiring a flashlight, though deep shadows still obscured details of the surrounding forest. The outhouse, constructed from rough-hewn lumber and designed for maximum durability rather than comfort, had served the conservation station faithfully for 4 seasons. Its simple design included a heavy wooden door latched securely to prevent wildlife intrusion, though previous users occasionally reported evidence of curious bears investigating the structure. The building's human scent and residual warmth made it an object of interest for wildlife, particularly during cooler weather when any heat source attracted attention. As Blackstone approached the outhouse door and reached for the latch, he noticed unusual scratching sounds inside the structure. His sleep-fogged brain initially dismissed the noise as wind moving loose boards, or perhaps a small animal like a squirrel that had somehow gotten trapped inside. He opened the door without hesitation, expecting to find an empty facility ready for use. Instead, he found himself face to face with a massive grizzly bear that had somehow squeezed its bulk through the outhouse doorway during the night. The bear, estimated to weigh over 600 pounds later, had been attracted by residual human scent, or perhaps seeking shelter from the cold mountain air. Its presence filled the small structure, leaving no room for movement as the surprised animal was trapped in an impossibly confined space. The bear's reaction was immediate and explosive. Startled by the sudden appearance of a human silhouette in the doorway, it burst from the outhouse with tremendous force, its massive shoulders striking the doorframe and splintering the wooden structure. Blackstone, caught completely off guard by the encounter, fell backward into the surrounding brush as the bear charged past him in its desperate attempt to escape the confining space. The student's collision with the bear lasted only seconds, but the impact sent Blackstone tumbling down a slight embankment into thick vegetation. His left wrist struck a fallen log with considerable force, resulting in a clean break that would require surgical repair. More seriously, the shock of the encounter combined with the cold mountain air triggered a mild hypothermic response that left him disoriented and unable to call for help immediately. Equally traumatized by its confinement and unexpected human encounter, the grizzly crashed through the forest in the opposite direction, destroying several small trees and leaving a clear trail of disturbed vegetation. Rangers who investigated the incident later found claw marks and brown hair throughout the interior of the damaged outhouse, confirming the bear's prolonged presence inside the structure. Blackstone managed to crawl back to the main camp building after nearly an hour of struggling through the underbrush, his broken wrist causing excruciating pain with each movement. His fellow researchers provided first aid and activated emergency communication protocols that eventually resulted in a helicopter evacuation to a hospital in Cranbrook, where doctors treated his injuries and hypothermia. The incident became legendary among conservation station personnel, who thereafter referred to the facility's replacement outhouse as the Brown Bear Hotel. The story served as a humorous but sobering reminder of the constant presence of wildlife in true wilderness areas, where even the most mundane human activities could result in unexpected encounters with dangerous predators.